Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Michaels with AeroDynamic Advisory, where I'm Managing Director, and I'm very excited to share my thoughts with you in brief today on the impact of COVID on the commercial aerospace supply chain. So it's a real pleasure to be here for ADS Live 2021. So clearly, the COVID crisis is unprecedented in the jet age, and so much of what is going to happen and how quickly our industry will recover is going to be linked, of course, to vaccine distribution, and penetration in various countries. What I show on the left here is when we expect to see herd immunity reached in various parts of the world, and the dark green are those that reach it first. And the usual places you might expect. The US, much of Europe, we expect to see it first. But in large parts of the world, it's going to take much longer. It's going to go out to 2022 or 2023, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. What's that mean for air travel? It means it's going to take a while to get back. And I know there are various projections out there today. We believe it'll be late 2023 in our nominal scenario when RPKs recover to pre-COVID level. The two exceptions here are China, domestic China, and air cargo. And speaking of air cargo, this is one of the bright spots in aviation today. And it's interesting that air cargo activity recovered to pre-COVID levels by the end of last year. And what's happening now is that we've had an explosion of e-commerce and particularly online shopping across the world. And that has led to new distribution channels, new behaviors. We've really accelerated online shopping by 5 to 10 years. It turns out that the supply chains that support people like Amazon favor air cargo over slower and less expensive transportation alternatives like maritime. And so what that means, and that is what is behind this very fast recovery, and it means that when we get to the other side of this crisis and we get back to sound global growth, I think we're in for a good period of growth in air cargo. There are about 2,000 cargo freighters today in service. And it's interesting, in normal times, air cargo accounts for maybe 12% of airline revenues. Last year, it was 30%. So definitely one of the bright spots in our industry today for these 2,000 freighter aircraft. Now, when will we see production get back to pre-COVID levels, as we're all in the supply chain today? And our belief, and this is a production forecast and not a delivery forecast, is we were producing almost 1,900 jetliners and turboprops before the crisis. And we've dropped off by more than half last year, as you all know. We believe it will not be till 2026 or 2027 till we reach pre-COVID levels. And I think what's more important, and especially for British Aerospace, is the mix of aircraft. And we will see a shift away from twin aisles to more single aisles. So this means aircraft like the 321neo are going to benefit. But we're going to certainly see less production in the A350 XWB and 787 and so forth. And that is a real challenge, of course, for Rolls-Royce. And I needn't elaborate that to this conference. So we will see a shift mix favoring single aisles in the years ahead, but it's going to take 4 to 5 years to get back to pre-COVID levels. Now, what about the supply chain? The OEMs in this period are deleveraging, and they're shifting away from vertical integration, which was one of the predominant trends in recent years. And so we're seeing in Europe OEM deleveraging, where Airbus terminated plans to vertically integrate on the A320neo geared turbofan nacelle. Airbus has recently stated that they consider aerostructures to be core, but it's certainly clear that this inevitable push for more and more and more vertical integration at Airbus, and at Boeing, as I'll touch on in a minute, is ending. Rolls-Royce clearly is deleveraging. It's no secret to all of you, with plans to sell more than 2 billion sterling in assets. And of course, ITP Aero is one they've announced publicly. They also recently are trying to sell Bergen, their maritime diesel subsidiary, which is being held up now politically. That's a Norwegian company. So we'll see where that one goes. And of course, Bombardier, moving out of third-party aerostructures, selling Short Brothers to Spirit Aerosystems, and that is another example of OEM deleveraging. Boeing, of course, has been very public in its vertical integration. It's set up a number of businesses within a Boeing. Vertical integration is diverse as avionics to flight controls. Of course, Boeing built an actuation production facility in the UK. But they're looking at auxiliary power units, interiors, aerostructures, propulsion systems, and I think really Boeing here is going to recalibrate its whole vertical integration strategy. The pendulum probably swung too far, and I think it's very, very ambitious plans that were in place before COVID are definitely being recalibrated. Now, what does this mean for the supply chain? If you're a tier one supplier, meaning you're a system supplier, or you're maybe a major aerostructure supplier like a Premium Aerotech or a GKN, what does it mean? I think like OEMs, the tier ones are going to purge underperforming and non-core assets. A great example of this is Triumph exiting aerostructures. I think we'll see avionics and system suppliers. They are the least vulnerable in this big downturn, given their market diversification and aftermarket exposure. So they're seeing the least pain in all of this. Aerostructures and interior suppliers that are tier ones are seeing the most pain, and they're under significant financial distress and are right sizing, shuttering some facilities, cutting back capacity. In some cases, they're even insourcing to keep capacity utilization up. Cash-rich tier ones and holding companies, as well as private equity, will be active in merger and acquisition. And of course, we recently saw, and this is not completed yet, but Eaton announced its intent to purchase Cobham's Fuel and Air Division. This is airborne refueling. And Eaton, of course, is a diversified industrial company that is doing very well in automotive and other industrial sectors, and aerospace is a small portion of their revenue. They're generating a lot of cash right now, and they see this crisis as an opportunity to grow their position. And I think for sure we're going to see the blind pursuit of scale without synergies really go away. And one of the announced mergers before the crisis was Woodward, an actuation and fuel system supplier, and Hexcel, a carbon fiber prepreg supplier. Absolutely no synergy here. And they thankfully called off this merger. But I do think there is one important point as we think about tier ones. You know, Boeing, which has been, at odds with its tier ones as part of its Partnering for Success 1.0 and 2.0 initiatives. And of course, Airbus has been pursuing its own supply chain initiatives with Scope Plus. But for Boeing in particular, which needs to launch a new aircraft, it needs risk-sharing partners. And the question is will they come to a rapprochement with their tier ones, because they are going to need them to respond to the A321neo and introduce its next white sheet, which I believe has to happen. What about the sub-tier suppliers? And what I'm showing you here are their tier twos, those that make components and subassemblies, the tier threes that do make-to-print parts, and tier fours, which are the mill products, forging and casting. Well, at the tier twos, we're going to see some attrition at aerostructures and interiors, targeted acquisitions by tier ones here as well. Teledyne acquisition of FLIR Systems being an example, and potentially unwinding poorly constructed tier ones and turning them into tier twos. TransDigm bought Esterline and turned it into more than 15 tier two companies, going back to the old brands. At the tier three, that's where we see the big attrition happening. These are the make to print shops, the smaller mom and pops. Think of the Midlands in the UK. And this is what we need to really watch. Attrition is expected here. Diversified suppliers serving defense, business and general aviation, or non-aerospace customers are best positioned. Government support programs are going to be very important here. We've seen very limited attrition in the UK thus far. The executives I've spoken to think that the defense activity in the UK is helping to sustain many of these smaller suppliers, and may that continue. And finally, when we get to the tier 4 level, this is mostly consolidated. There are very big companies here providing mill product and forging and casting, and they should be able to survive this crisis, although they will see probably the biggest downturn in business in the years ahead. So those are my comments in brief, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the session.